Daniel Archer had learned 3 critical rules during his diplomatic posting on New Meridian. Never insult Velan cuisine, always bow exactly 15 degrees when greeting officials, and absolutely never expect to understand their technology. The 4th rule, don't accidentally impregnate an alien queen, hadn't been covered in his training manual, probably because it seemed statistically impossible. Yet here he stood in a transport gate that made his molecules feel like they were being played like a harp, watching reality bend around him in ways that would have made his physics professors weep. The gate's attendant, a young Velan woman with copper-toned ears that twitched with barely suppressed amusement, had assured him this was the gentle setting. Daniel decided not to ask what the aggressive setting felt like. When the light solidified and his stomach remembered where it belonged, he found himself in a garden that shouldn't exist. Trees with silver bark grew upward and downward simultaneously, their roots drinking from floating pools of water that hung in the air like liquid sculptures. The fragrance was overwhelming, something between jasmine and ozone, sweet but electric. Through the transparent canopy above, 3 moons hung in a violet sky, each a different size, each casting its own shadow. Ambassador Archer, the Queen will see you now. The voice belonged to a tall Velan man whose ears were adorned with 7 golden rings, more than Daniel had seen on anyone outside of historical archives. His expression suggested he'd rather escort a particularly aggressive space fungus than a human diplomat. I'm not actually an ambassador, Daniel said, following the man down a pathway that seemed to be made of compressed starlight. Just a trade negotiator, 3rd class. I mostly handle grain shipments and mineral rights. Today you are whatever the Queen requires you to be. That sounded ominous enough that Daniel decided silence was the better part of valor. They passed through corridors that hummed with harmonic frequencies, past guards whose weapons looked like crystallized music, and finally through doors that opened like water parting. The throne room beyond was simultaneously intimate and vast, its proportions playing tricks on Daniel's perception. Was it the size of a cathedral or a sitting room? Both. Neither. Queen Isara sat on a throne that appeared to be carved from a single piece of amber, though it pulsed with inner light that suggested it was very much alive. She was exactly as the diplomatic briefings had described: silver hair, high cheekbones, bearing that could freeze hydrogen, but they hadn't mentioned the fury. It radiated from her like heat, making the air shimmer. "Everyone out," she said, her voice carrying a harmonic overtone that made Daniel's teeth ache. The room emptied with impressive speed. Daniel found himself alone with a monarch who ruled 17 star systems and currently looked like she wanted to turn him into his component atoms. "Your Majesty, I'm honored." "You're the father." Daniel blinked, then blinked again. His translator implant, usually reliable, must have malfunctioned during the gate transit. "I'm sorry, could you repeat?" "You are the father of my child." Each word was enunciated with the precision of a surgical laser. The genetic bond formed 3 months ago during the harvest feast. The physicians confirmed it this morning. Daniel's mind performed several complicated gymnastics routines while his mouth struggled to form words. I would definitely remember if we'd." The chalice of resonance. Isara stood, and despite his height advantage, Daniel felt small. "The ceremonial drink we shared, it's not merely symbolic, human. It creates a genetic resonance between compatible individuals. In rare cases, extraordinarily rare cases, it can result in conception. By drinking something, that's not how human reproduction. You are not on a human world." She descended from her throne, and Daniel noticed her hands were shaking slightly. Fury, yes, but something else underneath. Fear. "Your diplomatic corps assured us that humans were genetically incompatible with Velans. That such ceremonies posed no risk. They were wrong." Daniel's legs decided sitting down was an excellent idea, protocol be damned. He found a bench that might have been grown rather than built and collapsed onto it. "So you're saying that because I drank from a ceremonial cup 3 months ago, thinking I was just being polite. I'm now the genetic co-parent of the heir to the Velen Empire. Yes, Isara's laugh was bitter. Congratulations, human. You've accomplished what a dozen assassination attempts and 3 civil wars could not. You've destroyed my reign. I'm pretty sure I didn't do this on purpose, Daniel said, then immediately regretted it as her eyes flashed with renewed anger. Not that this is about me. Obviously, you're the one who's actually physically pregnant with an alien hybrid, which probably wasn't on your agenda for the year. My agenda. Isara's voice rose, and the room's ambient harmonics rose with it. My agenda was to negotiate a trade agreement for quantum crystals. My agenda was to navigate the High Council's latest attempt to marry me off to Lord Thurin's insufferable son. My agenda was not to bear a half-human child that will give my political enemies everything they need to declare me unfit to rule. Can't you just, I mean medically? Daniel trailed off as Isara's expression made it clear he'd ventured into dangerous territory. The genetic bond once formed cannot be broken, not without killing both mother and child. It's woven into our biology at the quantum level. She turned away, and for the first time her regal composure cracked. I have no choice. Neither of us do. Daniel sat in silence, watching the Queen's shoulders rise and fall with carefully controlled breathing. Outside, through the transparent walls, one of the moons was setting, casting everything in amber light. Somewhere in the palace, someone was playing an instrument that sounded like crystallized sadness. How long? He finally asked. Velen gestation is 7 months. The physicians estimate the hybrid nature may accelerate it further. So we have time to figure something out. Isara turned back to him, and her expression was cold enough to frost stars. You're not leaving, human. I can't risk you returning to your people and spreading word of this disaster. You'll remain here in the palace under guard until I decide what to do with you. You're making me a prisoner. I'm making you a secret. She moved toward the door, then paused. Your quarters are in the eastern wing. Kevris will show you. Don't attempt to contact your diplomatic corps. Don't attempt to leave the palace grounds. And don't. She hesitated, something flickering across her face that might have been vulnerability. Don't tell anyone that I'm terrified. Then she was gone, leaving Daniel alone in a throne room that hummed with alien music, staring at his hands and trying to process the fact that his life had just become infinitely stranger than any science fiction novel he'd ever read. The door opened again, and a Velen man with an expression of barely contained amusement entered. His ears, Daniel noticed, had small silver studs that caught the light. I'm Kevris, your cultural liaison, apparently. Also your guard, translator, and according to the Queen's very specific instructions, the person responsible for keeping you from doing anything else cosmically stupid. He grinned. This is going to be entertaining. Daniel looked up at him. Define entertaining. Well, for starters, you just made interstellar history. The first human to impregnate a Velen queen through ceremonial beverage consumption. I've already started a betting pool on whether you survive the month. That's not reassuring. It's not meant to be. Come on, let me show you to your gilded cage. It has an excellent view of the quantum gardens. Very romantic, if you ignore the part where you're essentially a prisoner of an angry monarch carrying your genetically impossible child. Daniel followed him out, each step feeling surreal. Through a window, he caught a glimpse of the violet sky, the unfamiliar constellations, and thought about how his last report to Earth had been about grain tariffs. He really should have read the fine print on that ceremonial cup. Daniel woke to the sensation of his bed humming. Not vibrating, humming, a multitonal melody that seemed to emanate from the crystalline frame itself. He sat up, disoriented, and discovered that his gilded cage was considerably more gilded than he'd registered the night before. The walls shifted between opacity and transparency based on some algorithm he couldn't decipher, currently showing him a sunrise over mountains that definitely hadn't been there yesterday. Either the palace moved, or the windows did. With Velen technology, both seemed equally plausible. A soft chime announced a visitor. Kevris entered without waiting for permission, carrying a tray that steamed with something that looked like breakfast and smelled like a chemistry experiment. "Morning, ambassador of accidental reproduction," Kevris said cheerfully, setting the tray on a table that grew from the floor at his approach. "I brought you nourishment and devastating news. Pick which you'd like first." "Coffee?" Daniel asked hopefully. "We don't have coffee. We have Kalish, which is similar except it's blue, tastes like liquid starlight, and will make you see sounds for approximately 20 minutes. "I'll skip it. What's the devastating news?" Kevris settled into a chair that molded itself to his form, his elongated ears twitching with barely suppressed amusement. "You're famous. Well, infamous. The entire palace is buzzing about the human the Queen has taken into her private wing. The rumors range from secret diplomatic consort, to exotic pet, to human sacrifice for the harvest festival." "There's a harvest festival that requires human sacrifice." "No, but people are creative when they're bored. The truth, of course, is far more interesting, but only about 6 people know it. The Queen, you, me, the High Council, and the royal physicians who are currently having collective nervous breakdowns trying to figure out hybrid Velen-human gestation." Daniel poked at something on his plate that might have been eggs or might have been a sophisticated protein substitute. It poked back. He decided to stick with what looked like bread. "How is this possible? I mean, humans and Velens aren't even from the same evolutionary tree. We're not even from the same galaxy originally." "Convergent evolution is fascinating," Kevris said, stealing a piece of the maybe eggs from Daniel's plate. "Velens and humans are remarkably similar on a genetic level. Same basic biochemistry, same general structure. The main differences are the ears, obviously, and our reproductive biology is more sophisticated. Sophisticated enough to get pregnant from sharing a drink. The chalice of resonance isn't just a drink. It contains a sample of harmonic cells from both participants. When you both drank, those cells analyzed your genetic compatibility at the quantum level. In 99.9% of cases, nothing happens. It's symbolic. But in 0.1% of cases, the cells find a resonance pattern, a genetic harmony, and they create what we call a seed bond." Daniel set down his bread. "You're telling me my DNA sang with the Queen's DNA?" "Poetically put, yes. And now there's a life growing that's a fusion of both harmonic patterns, the first of its kind." Kevris's expression grew serious. "Which is why the High Council is currently debating whether to celebrate you or execute you." "I'm voting for celebration." "Noted. Unfortunately, you don't get a vote." Kevris stood, stretching in a way that made his joints produce tiny harmonic tones. "The Queen wants to see you. She's finished her morning council session, during which several members suggested various creative solutions to her human problem. You'll be pleased to know beheading is currently out of favor." "That's comforting." "It should be. Last month it was very much in fashion." The walk to the Queen's private chambers took them through sections of the palace Daniel hadn't seen. They passed a room where Velens were conducting what looked like musical practice, but was apparently a form of quantum mechanics calculation. Another chamber held what Kevris called a memory garden, plants that recorded and played back historical events through pollen that induced specific hallucinations. Daniel decided not to ask questions about that one. Queen Isara's chambers were smaller than expected, more intimate. The walls were set to show a gentle rainfall over silver forests, and the ambient harmonics were quieter here, almost soothing. She sat at a desk covered in holographic displays, data streaming past her eyes faster than Daniel could track. She looked exhausted. "Your Majesty," Daniel began, then stopped as she held up one hand. "We need to talk, and I need you to be honest because I'm too tired for diplomatic evasion." She dismissed the displays with a gesture. Do you have family on Earth? The question caught him off guard. A sister, parents, why? Because I need to understand what you're risking by being here, what you're losing. She stood, moving to a window that showed real sky now, not a projection. I've been queen for 30 years. I inherited the throne at 25 when my mother died in a diplomatic incident that was definitely not an accident. I've spent 3 decades learning to trust no one, need no one, because vulnerability is a weapon my enemies use. That sounds lonely. It's practical. She turned to face him, and Daniel saw the cracks in her armor clearly now. But this situation requires something different. You and I are bound together by genetics and politics. I can't change that. Neither can you. So I'm asking, can you tolerate me for the next several months? Because I don't know if I can do this alone. Daniel had prepared for accusations, for anger, for royal commands. He hadn't prepared for vulnerability. I'm not sure what I can offer. I'm a mid-level trade negotiator who specialized in agricultural commodities. I know exactly nothing about pregnancy, Velen politics, or how to help an alien queen navigate a genetic crisis. But you can offer me honesty. Everyone else in this palace wants something from me: power, influence, favor. You're the only person here who has no agenda beyond survival. She almost smiled. Also, according to Kevris, you have a peculiar human sense of humor that might make the next 7 months slightly less unbearable. 6 months now, probably. Kevris interjected from where he stood by the door. The physicians think the hybrid genetics are accelerating development. Wonderful. Isara moved back to her desk but remained standing. I've scheduled a meeting with the High Council tomorrow. They want to question you, assess whether you're a threat to the Empire. It will not be pleasant. Will they try to kill me? Not during the actual meeting, that would be rude. She met his eyes. But Lord Thurin is pushing for what he calls the cleanest solution. Your execution and the medical termination of the pregnancy, despite what I told you about the impossibility. He sounds delightful. He's a political rival who's been trying to arrange a marriage between me and his son for a decade. Your existence has complicated his plans significantly. Isara touched her abdomen, a gesture so unconscious Daniel wondered if she realized she was doing it. I won't let them harm you or the child, but I need you to present well tomorrow. Can you do that? Define present well. Don't make jokes about impregnating queens through ceremonial beverages. Don't question their authority. Don't mention that Velen formal dress makes you look like you're wearing a chandelier. That's oddly specific. Kevris showed me the report you filed last year about the trade summit. Daniel felt his face heat. That was supposed to be private correspondence. Nothing is private in a palace. Isara's expression softened slightly. I read all your reports, actually. You have an interesting perspective on Velen culture, irreverent but insightful. You notice things my own advisors miss, because you're not afraid to question why we do what we do. I wasn't trying to insult anyone. You didn't. You just saw us clearly, which is rarer than you'd think. She moved toward the door, indicating the conversation was ending. Kevris will prepare you for tomorrow. Try to sleep tonight. The High Council can smell fear, and they enjoy it far too much. As they left her chambers, Daniel found himself processing the encounter. The Queen had asked for help, not demanded, asked, had shown vulnerability, had suggested they might actually work together rather than simply coexist in mutual hostility. She likes you, Kevris said as they walked. She threatened to keep me prisoner yesterday. Yes, but today she asked for your honesty. That's significant. Kevris grinned. Also, I should mention that Velen pregnancy involves some interesting side effects. Heightened emotional sensitivity, mild telepathic connections with the father, and occasional bioluminescent skin patterns. The father experiences those things. Oh no, I meant the mother. You'll probably just get strange dreams and an inexplicable urge to build things. Human-Velen hybrid effects are completely theoretical. though so really anything could happen. Daniel stopped walking. Anything. Anything. You might grow ears. She might develop a taste for human food. The child might be able to manipulate quantum fields with its thoughts. We're in completely uncharted territory. Kevris clapped him on the shoulder. Exciting, isn't it? That's one word for it. They reached Daniel's quarters, and Kevris left him with instructions to rest and prepare for tomorrow's interrogation. Daniel stood at the window, watching the alien sky shift through unfamiliar colors, and wondered how his life had become something that would require multiple scientific papers and possibly several therapy sessions to properly explain. His communicator chimed, the palace's internal system that Kevris had given him. A message from Queen Asara appeared, text only. Thank you for not making this harder than it already is. Daniel stared at it for a long moment, then typed back, we're in this together, apparently literally on a quantum level. The response came quickly, your humor is terrible. You smiled though, I heard the harmonics change. A longer pause then, perhaps slightly, don't let it encourage you. Daniel set the communicator down, and despite everything, the impossible situation, the political danger, the sheer absurdity of his life, he felt something that might have been hope. The High Council chamber reminded Daniel of a predator's den, circular, tiered, with the guest seat positioned at the exact center where all eyes could track movement. 12 council members sat in their elevated positions, ears adorned with rank markers that caught the ambient light, their expressions ranging from curious to openly hostile. Daniel recognized Lord Thurin immediately from the briefing Kevris had provided, silver-haired, 3 elaborate ear cuffs on each side, and a smile that suggested he enjoyed watching small creatures squirm. Queen Asara sat at the highest position, her face an impassive mask. Daniel had learned enough about Velen body language to notice the tension in her shoulders, the way her fingers drummed a silent pattern against her throne's armrest. She was worried. Ambassador Archer, Lord Thurin began, his voice carrying harmonic overtones that made the title sound like an insult. Or should I say, trade negotiator 3rd class. Let's establish your actual credentials before we proceed. Trade negotiator is fine, Daniel said, keeping his voice steady. I've been stationed on New Meridian for 3 years, primarily handling agricultural and mineral exchange agreements between human colonies and Velen territories. How pedestrian. This came from Lady Saris, a woman whose ears bore complex mathematical equations etched in silver. And yet somehow, you've achieved what no human has before, genetic integration with our queen. Please, enlighten us as to how someone of your limited station accomplished this. Daniel met her gaze. I drank from a ceremonial cup during the harvest feast, as instructed by your diplomatic protocol officer. I was told it was symbolic. Apparently, someone forgot to mention it could also be reproductive. A ripple of whispers circulated through the chamber. Several council members looked uncomfortable. The chalice of resonance has been used in royal ceremonies for 6 centuries. Another councillor interjected, this one younger with bronze-toned ears. Never once has it resulted in conception with an off-worlder. Then I'm either extraordinarily lucky or cosmically cursed, Daniel said. I haven't decided which. You think this is amusing? Lord Thurin's voice sharpened, and the room's ambient harmonics shifted with it, pressing against Daniel's eardrums. You've compromised the purity of the royal bloodline, created a political crisis that threatens the stability of 17 star systems, and you dare to make jokes. Would you prefer I panic? Because I spent most of yesterday doing that, and it wasn't productive for anyone. Daniel forced himself to remain calm despite the pressure building in his skull from the harmonic assault. I didn't engineer this situation. I didn't even know it was possible. But it's happened, and killing me won't change the fact that Queen Asara is carrying a child. A hybrid, Lady Saris said coldly. An unknown biological entity that could pose risks we cannot calculate. It's a child, Daniel countered. A person, not a biological specimen or a political inconvenience. You presume to lecture us on how to value life. Lord Thurin rose from his seat, and Daniel noticed several guards shifting position. You, who have contaminated our queen with inferior genetic material. That's enough. Queen Isara's voice cut through the chamber like a blade, and the harmonics obeyed her, shifting to support her authority. This council will not devolve into xenophobic rhetoric while I still hold this throne. Your Majesty, with respect, your condition is precisely why we must discuss uncomfortable truths. Lord Thurin turned to face her. The genetic councils are demanding answers. The outer provinces are questioning your fitness to rule. We have reports of 3 separate systems threatening to withdraw their allegiance if you proceed with this pregnancy. Then they misunderstand the nature of Velen law, Isara said, her voice deadly quiet. The genetic bond once formed cannot be severed. This is not a choice, it is biology. There are always choices, Lady Sarah said. Difficult choices but necessary ones. The physicians admit they've never dealt with a hybrid pregnancy. The risks to your life alone are my risks to take. Daniel watched the exchange, feeling increasingly like he was observing a chess game where he was simultaneously a piece and a spectator. The council wasn't just questioning his presence, they were questioning whether Isara should survive her own pregnancy. Let's discuss practical matters, said Councillor Marin, the bronze-eared one who'd spoken earlier. His tone was more measured, less hostile. Ambassador Archer, what does Earth's government know about this situation? Nothing yet, Daniel admitted. My communications have been blocked since I arrived at the palace. Convenient, Lord Thurin muttered. Necessary, Isara corrected. Until we understand the political ramifications, premature disclosure serves no one. And when Earth discovers that one of their diplomats has been held incommunicado by an alien monarch, Marin pressed, that won't exactly foster the peaceful relations we've been cultivating. Earth's diplomatic corps was assured that humans and Velens were genetically incompatible, Daniel said. They were wrong. Someone should probably tell them before another unsuspecting negotiator drinks from the wrong ceremonial cup. Several council members shifted uncomfortably. Kevris, standing guard near the entrance, made a sound that might have been a suppressed laugh. The human makes a valid point, Marin acknowledged. Our own xenobiologists assured us the chalice posed no risk to human participants. This failure of scientific understanding is on us, not him. A failure that has created an unprecedented crisis, Lady Sarah said. The genetic makeup of this child is completely unknown. It could be born with abilities that threaten both species. It could be incompatible with life itself. We are gambling with forces we do not understand. Then we study it, Daniel said, surprising himself with his own boldness. Your physicians are scientists working together. This is unprecedented, yes, but it's also an opportunity. How often do 2 intelligent species get the chance to learn from genuine genetic integration? You want us to turn this disaster into a research project. Lord Thurin's disgust was palpable. I want you to stop treating it like a disaster and start treating it like what it is, a new form of life that didn't ask to be created but deserves a chance to exist. Daniel stood, ignoring the guards who tensed at his movement. I'm not a geneticist or a politician. I'm just someone who's been thrown into an impossible situation with your queen. But I know enough about both our species to understand that fear and hostility won't solve this. Cooperation might. The chamber fell silent. Daniel could hear his own heartbeat, could feel the weight of 12 pairs of eyes analyzing every aspect of his body language. Sit down, human, Lord Thurin said finally, before you embarrass yourself further. I think he's done rather well, Councillor Marin said quietly. Better than most would under such scrutiny. Queen Isara hadn't moved, but something in her posture had shifted. When she spoke, her voice carried a weight that silenced even Lord Thurin. This council will reach no decisions today, Ambassador Archer has answered your questions with more honesty than most would dare show. The genetic bond is formed, the pregnancy is progressing, and the political ramifications will be managed. What I require from this council is solutions, not executions. Your Majesty, Lord Thurin began, this session is concluded. Isara rose, and the harmonics shifted to support her dismissal. We reconvene in 3 days. I suggest you all spend that time considering how to govern an empire, not how to eliminate inconvenient truths. She swept from the chamber, leaving Daniel standing in the center of the ring, uncertain whether he just survived or merely postponed his execution. The council members filed out in strained silence, though Councillor Marin paused to give Daniel a slight nod that might have been respect or might have been pity. Kevris approached once the room emptied. Well, that went better than expected. Did it? You're still alive. Lord Thurin was definitely planning to challenge you to a harmonic duel, which would have liquefied your internal organs, so yes. Better than expected. Kevris guided him toward the exit. Also, you made the Queen smile during your genetic speech. I saw her harmonics spike with approval. I didn't see her smile. Velens don't always smile with their faces. We smile with our ears. Hers did that little flutter thing that means she was pleased despite herself. They found Isara waiting in a side chamber. Pacing in a way that suggested her composure in the council room had cost her significantly. She turned when they entered, and her ears did something complicated that Kevris had mentioned meant frustration mixed with relief. That was reckless, she said to Daniel, challenging Lord Thurin directly. Should I have let him call human genetics inferior? Yes, if it kept you alive. She stopped pacing, and for a moment her mask slipped entirely. Do you understand how precarious this is? They're not just questioning you, they're questioning whether I'm fit to rule, whether I've lost control, whether the genetic bond has somehow compromised my judgment. Has it? Daniel asked quietly. Isara's expression flickered through several emotions too quickly for him to track. I don't know. I can feel the child now faintly, like a frequency just at the edge of perception, and through it, sometimes I sense you. Your confusion, your fear, it's disconcerting. You can feel what I'm feeling. Fragments, impressions. The bond creates channels we don't fully understand. She touched her abdomen again, that unconscious gesture that seemed to happen more frequently. The physicians say it will intensify as the pregnancy progresses. Eventually, we might share dreams, thoughts. Our genetics are becoming intertwined. Daniel absorbed this, trying to process the implications. So we're going to be psychically linked. Possibly, no one knows for certain what happens with a hybrid bond. Isara met his eyes, which is why I need you to survive the council's scrutiny. Whatever is happening between us, whatever this child becomes, we're the only 2 people in the galaxy experiencing it. That makes us allies whether we choose to be or not. I can work with that, Daniel said. Can you? Even knowing that every day you stay here, you risk execution by my political enemies. Even knowing that this child might be rejected by both our species. Even knowing all of that, Daniel surprised himself with his certainty. Besides, I'm curious now. What does a human-Velen hybrid even look like? Will they have ears like yours? My eyes? Both? Neither. Despite everything, Isara almost laughed. Your ability to find curiosity in crisis is either admirable or insane. Probably both, Kevris offered helpfully. A chime sounded, an alert that sent tension rippling through the room. Kevris moved immediately to the chamber's communication panel, his expression darkening as he read the incoming message. There's been a security breach, he said quietly. Someone attempted to access the Royal Medical Wing. The guard stopped them, but he hesitated. They were carrying harmonic disruptors. Weapons, Isara translated for Daniel. Designed to interrupt biological frequencies, lethal to anyone pregnant. The implications settled over them like frost. Someone hadn't just been breaching security, they'd been attempting assassination, and the target was clear. The palace went into lockdown within minutes. Daniel found himself hustled through corridors he'd never seen, Kevris on one side and a squadron of guards on the other, their weapons humming with lethal harmonics. Queen Isara moved ahead of them, her posture rigid with controlled fury, issuing commands through a communication device that translated her words into cascading light patterns. They reached a secure chamber deep in the palace's central structure, a room that felt like it had been carved from a single massive crystal. The walls pulsed with defensive frequencies that made Daniel's bones vibrate uncomfortably. The intruder was killed resisting arrest, Kevris reported, reviewing incoming data on a holographic display. But security found evidence of coordination. This wasn't a lone assassin, it was a team. We captured 2 others trying to access the Eastern Gardens. Lord Thurin's doing? Daniel asked, then immediately regretted speaking when several guards turned to stare at him. We don't know yet, Isara said, but her expression suggested she had strong suspicions. Harmonic disruptors are restricted technology. Only council members have access to requisition them. So someone on your council just tried to kill you and our child, Daniel said flatly. That's wonderful, really brings the team together. Your humor is poorly timed, Isara snapped, but he caught the slight ear twitch that Kevris had taught him meant suppressed amusement despite stress. My humor is perfectly timed. If I can't joke about assassination attempts, what can I joke about? Daniel moved to where she stood, lowering his voice. How are you, actually? The question seemed to catch her off guard. Her hand moved to her abdomen, and Daniel noticed the faint luminescence beneath her skin, subtle blue-green patterns that hadn't been there before. The child reacted to the danger, she said quietly. I felt it. Fear transmitted through the bond. It knew something was wrong. That's horrifying and amazing simultaneously. That describes this entire situation. Isara's fingers traced the glowing patterns. The physicians say the bioluminescence means the pregnancy is progressing faster than expected. Hybrid vigor, they're calling it. The child is developing abilities neither species has alone. Like what? They don't know yet. But the harmonic signatures are unlike anything in our records. She finally looked at him directly. I'm terrified, Daniel. I've ruled an empire for 3 decades, survived countless political machinations, and I'm terrified of what's growing inside me. Before Daniel could respond, the chamber doors opened and Counselor Marin entered, flanked by guards. His expression was grim. Your Majesty, we've interrogated the captured assassins. They confess to working under Lord Thurin's orders. He paused. There's more. We've discovered evidence that he's been coordinating with separatist factions in the outer systems. This wasn't just about eliminating the hybrid pregnancy. It was the opening move of a coup. Isara's fury manifested as a visible shimmer in the air around her, the room's harmonics responding to her emotional state. Where is he? Fled. His ship departed 2 hours ago before we could secure him. But Your Majesty. Marin hesitated. His conspiracy had supporters. At least 4 council members were involved. The political situation is more fragile than we realized. Then we need to change the situation entirely, Daniel said, and everyone turned to stare at him again. What? I'm not allowed to have ideas. You're a trade negotiator, one of the guards muttered. Exactly, I negotiate. I find common ground between parties who think they have nothing in common. Daniel looked at Isara. You're trying to hide this pregnancy like it's a weakness. What if instead you announced it as a strength? Explain, Isara said, her voice dangerously quiet. Lord Thurin and his allies are using the pregnancy as evidence that you're unfit to rule, that you've been compromised by contact with an inferior species. They're controlling the narrative. Daniel began pacing, his mind working through the angles. But what if you flip it? Announce the pregnancy publicly, frame it as the beginning of a new era, the first genetic bridge between humans and Velans. Proof that our species can unite in the most fundamental way possible. That's insane, Marin said. That's politics, Daniel countered. Right now, your enemies are whispering in shadows, spreading fear. Bring it into the light. Make them argue publicly against something that could be seen as miraculous instead of monstrous. The genetic councils will never support, Marin began. The genetic councils don't have a hybrid child proving them wrong about genetic compatibility, Daniel interrupted. This pregnancy is scientific evidence that their theories about species separation were incomplete. You've got xenobiologists from both our worlds who would kill for the chance to study this. Make it a collaborative research project. Frame it as advancing both civilizations. Isara stood silent, and Daniel could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. Finally, she turned to Kevris. Contact the Human Diplomatic Corps on New Meridian. Tell them Ambassador Daniel Archer requests an urgent meeting regarding unprecedented developments in human-Velen relations. You're serious about this? Kevris asked. I'm tired of hiding. I'm tired of letting fear dictate policy. Isara's hand rested on her abdomen, where the bioluminescent patterns pulsed gently. If this child is going to reshape our understanding of genetic possibility, then we announce it on our terms, not Lord Thurin's. The next 3 days were chaos orchestrated into a plan. Daniel worked alongside Velen communication specialists and human diplomats who arrived from New Meridian looking simultaneously excited and terrified. The announcement was crafted with precision, not hiding the controversy, but reframing it as opportunity. Queen Isara would address both the Velen High Council and a joint session of human colonial governors simultaneously, connected by quantum communication arrays that bent space to make the conversation instantaneous across light years. Daniel spent hours preparing Isara for questions, teaching her about human political concerns, while she educated him about Velen cultural anxieties. They worked late into the nights, and Daniel began to understand what she'd meant about the bond. He could feel her determination, her fear, her growing protectiveness toward the child. And she apparently could feel his nervous habit of making terrible jokes when stressed. If you make one pun about universal health care during the announcement, I will have you removed, she warned him the night before. What about interstellar relations? Absolutely not. Expecting the unexpected. Daniel. Fine, I'll be professionally serious. He paused. But for the record, this child is going to have the best "How did your parents meet?" story in galactic history. Despite herself, Isara laughed, a genuine sound that made her ears flutter in that way Kevris had taught him meant joy. They'll certainly have complicated family reunions. The announcement itself was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Isara stood before the assembled councils, regal and uncompromising, with Daniel beside her, a deliberate choice that made several Velen traditionalists visibly uncomfortable. She spoke about the genetic bond, about the impossibility that had become reality, about the child that represented not contamination but evolution. The human governors were skeptical until Daniel provided testimony, explaining the science as the Velen physicians had taught him, emphasizing the unprecedented research opportunities. The Velen Council was divided, with Lord Thurin's allies trying to frame the announcement as desperation, but Councillor Marin and others countered by highlighting the potential for strengthened human-Velen cooperation. It wasn't a unanimous victory. 3 Velen systems did withdraw their allegiance temporarily. Several human colonies expressed concern about the precedent, but the scientific communities of both species responded with overwhelming enthusiasm, and within a week, a joint research facility was being established to monitor the pregnancy and study the implications. Isara's political position actually strengthened. The assassination attempt, once revealed, turned public opinion against the conspirators. Lord Thurin's reputation crumbled as evidence of his coup emerged, and the queen who had seemed isolated in her palace suddenly had allies. Scientists, progressives, citizens who saw the hybrid child as a symbol of possibility rather than threat. Daniel found himself in the strange position of being famous across two species. He gave interviews to human media outlets who couldn't decide if he was a hero or an idiot. Velen scholars requested audiences to ask about human genetics. Children on both worlds apparently found the story romantic, which made him profoundly uncomfortable. Through it all, the pregnancy progressed. Isara's bioluminescent patterns grew more pronounced, creating constellations across her skin that the physician said mapped the child's developing neural pathways. Daniel experienced increasingly vivid dreams, not his own, but impressions from the child, abstract concepts of light and sound and emotion that didn't quite translate to human experience. 5 months after the announcement, Isara went into labor 3 weeks ahead of schedule. Daniel was in the delivery chamber, which was less a medical facility and more a symphony of technology designed to monitor and support both mother and child at the quantum level. The physicians were a mixed team of Velen and human specialists who had learned to work together despite drastically different medical philosophies. The birth itself was unlike anything in either species' normal experience. The child emerged amid pulses of bioluminescent light, their first cry a harmonic tone that made every piece of equipment in the room resonate in sympathy. They had Isara's silver hair and Daniel's darker skin tone, and their ears. Their ears were somewhere between human and Velen, slightly pointed but not as dramatically elongated. "They're beautiful," Isara whispered, exhausted and radiant, as the physicians completed their examinations. "They're impossible," one of the human doctors said, checking readings. "Brain activity showing patterns we've never seen. Genetic markers that shouldn't be able to coexist. This child is going to rewrite xenobiology textbooks." "They're a person first," Daniel said, reaching out to touch one tiny hand. "We can worry about textbooks later." The child's eyes opened, one amber like Isara's, one brown like Daniel's, and seemed to focus with impossible awareness for a newborn. Their fingers wrapped around Daniel's with surprising strength. "What should we name them?" Isara asked, and Daniel realized this was the first time they'd actually discussed it. "Something that works in both languages," he suggested. "Something that means bridge, maybe, or harmony." "Aaron is the Velen word for harmony," Kevris offered from where he stood guard at the door. "It translates reasonably well to human phonetics." "Aaron," Isara repeated, testing it. The child made a small sound, and the room's harmonics shifted to something that felt like contentment. "I think they approve." News of the birth spread faster than light, carried by quantum communicators to every human colony and Velen system. The response was complex: celebration, controversy, scientific fascination, political maneuvering. But for Daniel, standing in that chamber watching Isara hold their impossible child, the galaxy's opinion seemed very far away. "So," he said quietly, "we survived." "We did more than survive," Isara replied. "We changed what's possible." "No pressure on Aaron, then?" "None whatsoever." She smiled, and this time it reached her ears entirely. "Just reshaping the future of two civilizations. Perfectly normal expectations for a child." "They'll be fine," Daniel said with more confidence than he felt. "They've got you for political brilliance, me for terrible jokes, and Kevris for everything practical." "I'm not raising your child," Kevris called from the doorway. "You're already invested. You started that betting pool." "Which I won, incidentally. I bet you'd both survive and the child would be born healthy. I'm rich now." Aaron made another small sound, and Daniel could have sworn it was laughter. Impossible, of course. Newborns didn't laugh. But then again, everything about this situation had been impossible from the start. 3 months later, Daniel stood beside Isara on a balcony overlooking the palace gardens, Aaron sleeping in a specialized carrier that monitored their unique physiology. Below, representatives from 12 human colonies and 20 Velen systems gathered for the first joint council session, a direct result of what was being called the Harmony Initiative. "Think it'll work?" Daniel asked. Probably not, Isara admitted. Politics doesn't change overnight just because one hybrid child exists. But it's a start. It's a start. She looked down at Aaron, whose ears twitched in sleep. And were proof that bridges can be built, even between species that thought they had nothing in common except incompatibility. Poetic. I've been practicing. You've corrupted me with your human sentimentality. You say that like it's a bad thing. Isara's hand found his, their fingers intertwining. Through the bond, Daniel felt what she felt: hope, exhaustion, fierce protectiveness, and something that might have been affection or might have been the beginning of something deeper. It was too complex to define, too new to name. But it was real as the child they'd somehow created, as real as the future they were building together across the impossible distance between worlds.